Okay, everyone, good afternoon. Welcome to the webinar version of the Boston Foundation's Open Door Grants information session. We're so glad that you could join us. Thank you for doing that and for your time today. So, my name is, my name is, as you can see, Stephanie Guidry. I am a program officer here at the Boston Foundation, focused on our Open Door Grants program. And I'll be guiding you through sort of the first part of our info session today before handing it over to my colleague, Lauren McDermott. So what will we be talking about today? We'll cover a few relevant topics for prospective applicants for the Open Door Grants program. So let's walk through the agenda together. First, I will cover an overview of the Boston Foundation's grant making and also discuss how Open Door Grants fits into the Foundation's work and the overall grant making that we do here. I'll also share a few general things to know about Open Door Grants. And then I'll pass it over to my colleague, Lauren McDermott, who will share more about Open Door Grants eligibility, who we've funded in the past, and a few changes we made in the program in year 3 that are relevant to prospective applicants. At the end of our time together, we'll do a Q&A session. So we'll leave plenty of time to answer your questions. And I know we have this scheduled until 4 p.m. today, but we'll probably end a bit early, but still leave plenty of time for those questions. So speaking of questions, please feel free to submit any questions that you have throughout the webinar using the question mark that's located in the top right-hand corner of your screen. A text box will appear in the bottom right-hand corner of the screen once you press that, where you can ask the staff a question and then submit it via the blue send button. And we hope to get to as many questions as possible during the Q&A portion of today's webinar. Okay, so let's dive right in. Why did the Boston Foundation start the Open Door Grants program? Well, a quick overview. In 2015, the Boston Foundation underwent a strategic plan called Vision 2020. You can see a copy of that strategic plan. You can find it on our website. Pictured there on the screen. One of the main priorities outlined in the strategic plan, based on nonprofits' feedback, was to create an open funding mechanism for the greater Boston community. We had some smaller funds available to nonprofits for some time that were open, but we heard back from nonprofits they could be easier to navigate. And so we listened to that feedback, and in 2016, we launched Open Door Grants, a $2 million annual grant-making program that's meant to support a wide variety of needs, issues, and opportunities in Greater Boston. So the fund is in its 3rd year of grant making, and we're currently in our 2nd cycle of our 3rd year. So let's zoom out a moment and talk about how Open Door Grants fits into the overall picture of the Foundation's funding. And we'll spend a little bit of time on this slide just because this is where we tend to get the most questions from prospective applicants. So just to give you a really good, thorough foundational knowledge. So what you have in front of you is a visual of essentially all of the Boston Foundation's grant-making priorities for the $16 million in what we call our discretionary funding that's available to Greater Boston each year. So let's dig in a little bit on this. The majority of our grant-making resources are allocated to what the Boston Foundation calls impact areas or priority areas for funding. And that's located in the gold box on the left-hand side of the screen. The impact areas, which as you can see include arts and culture, education, health and wellness, housing and neighborhoods, and jobs and economic development, along with, there's an arrow below it, 2 cross-cutting strategies, nonprofit effectiveness and grassroots. This is essentially where the majority of our grant making goes and has gone for many years when we invest in the community. And as this visual indicates, under each of these impact areas are bullet points that share much more focused areas where we do our grant making essentially in that bigger area, right? So if you looked at the gold box on the right, you can see that ODG is designed to be complementary to those efforts, meaning whatever is not aligned with the strategies, the goals, the approaches pursued in those impact areas, that's what's eligible for Open Door grants. And so that's kind of the real function here, is a complementary approach to some of the priority grant making areas that I just shared. So for example, the arts and culture impact area that you see located on the far right hand side of the screen, it's really focused on a few specific things. So funding an ecology of artists, doing bigger scale policy and advocacy efforts, and also promoting animated, inclusive, open public spaces. So that certainly does not include everything in the arts and culture world, or a lot of things in Greater Boston that are being done in the arts and culture space. So anything that's not related to those very specific categories that I just mentioned is eligible for Open Door grants. So a great example of this is youth arts. It's not in one of these three areas I just outlined. And so youth arts programs can apply to Open Door grants. Or another example, if you look just to the right of the arts and culture area, you'll see education. In our impact area work for education, we're focused on funding cross-sector early childhood partnerships, structural reform for K through 12 education, as well as college completion efforts. So anything not related to these three areas of work would instead be eligible for Open Door grants because it's complementary. So for example, an after-school program focused on literacy education for fifth graders, it's certainly education related, but it's not eligible for that impact area, so instead should apply to Open Door grants. One note I'll also make is, in addition, there are lots of things not listed in the impact areas at all, and those things are also eligible for Open Door grants. So you'll notice subsectors like the environment, not listed in the impact areas, but they too would be eligible for Open Door grants. So again, this is where we get most of our questions, so we just wanted to spend some time here talking about how Open Door grants is meant to be complementary to our impact area and cross-cutting strategy grant making. And I know that description had quite a bit of insider baseball, so if you have questions, please do submit them via the chat function. All right, so just a couple other basic things to know about the specific types of grants we make through Open Door grants. The type of support that's available, you can apply for general operating support, so unrestricted support for the coming year of your work, or for project support for your organization. And project support can also include capacity building projects, so for operational or management capacity building. And one note I'd make here is we do not have a cap on the amount of administrative costs or overhead in a project support request. We just ask that you please apply for the true costs related to your program. Second, the funding level. The range of support available is $10,000 to $50,000, and we fund everything across that range. And last, the grant period. Open Door grants are one-year grants with the opportunity to apply for an additional year of support. And if you apply for 2 years of support in a row, then we just ask that you take 1 year off of funding before you reapply. So those are a few general notes about what's available through Open Door grants. And now I'll hand it over to my colleague, Laura McDermott, Grants Administration Associate, who also works on our Open Door grants team, to walk us through eligibility, who we funded previously, and changes we've made to the program in year 3.
Hi, everyone. As Stephanie mentioned, I'm Laura McDermott, and I'm also a member of our Open Door grants team. I'm going to get started with sharing our eligibility requirements to apply for an Open Door grant. As Stephanie explained earlier, our impact area grant making has very specific and narrow strategies, goals, and approaches. If your organization is aligned with an impact area's specific strategies, then you're not eligible for an open door grant. You can't apply for both an impact area grant and an open door grant, so it's either one or the other. If you have any hesitation, please reach out to either our team or a program officer here at the Foundation prior to applying. Unfortunately, if you apply and are in fact aligned with an impact area, we will not be able to consider your open door grant application. So to save you time on your end, please ask us first if you have any hesitation. Another eligibility requirement is that the organization has not applied in the last 12 months. So that's 12 months from the last application deadline, not 12 months from when you're notified. For example, if you submitted for our last deadline, which was August 1st of 2018, you're eligible to reapply August of 2019. The only exception to this rule is for those who applied in March of 2018. Since we're adjusting our grant making cycles, you'll be eligible for February 1st. It's not the full 12 months, so that's our one exception for this time around, is if you applied March 2018, you're eligible for February 1st, 2019. If you do not remember when you last applied, feel free to reach out and I can let you know when you're eligible to reapply again. Thirdly, your organization has to be a 501c3 tax-exempt nonprofit or operating under the physical sponsorship. If you do have a physical sponsor, we just ask for an agreement letter from them. And then finally, a requirement to apply is that you're primarily serving people in the Foundation's catchment area, with the exception of regional, statewide, or national public policy efforts. So the Foundation's catchment area is the map that's currently on your screen. As you can see, our catchment area is roughly the greater Boston area, going as far north as Rockport, and then a jagged line over to Framingham, and then down to the Duxbury Marshfield area as well. To be eligible, the organization itself does not have to be located in the Foundation's catchment area, but the work you're requesting funding for must be in the catchment area. For example, a national or statewide organization could apply for funding specifically for their Boston-based office, or if they're doing a new pilot program in Quincy. So it's not based off of your physical headquarters or your address, but the work that you're looking to fund. If after hearing the support available that Stephanie mentioned, as well as the eligibility requirements, you feel that Open Door Grants is a good fit for you, then you can start our application process. The application has two major components. The first is an online narrative application, and then we also require select fields within a Giving Common profile. The narrative application is available on our website. If you do not already have an account, you can simply create one by selecting New Applicant on the sign-in page. We don't require nonprofits to have a conversation with us prior to applying, and so you're welcome to sign up on your own. The second component of the application is the completion of select fields within a Giving Common profile. The Giving Common is a tool that connects funders to nonprofits organizations' data and information. In order to apply for an Open Door grant, you do not need to create a full profile, but we do ask for select fields to be completed. For example, we ask for your board and staff demographics, both ethnicity and gender, and the organization's last three years of financials if available. Typically, this includes your 990s and audits if you're required to file. There are a handful of other select fields to complete. All of that information can be found on our website, and you can reach out to the Giving Common team directly as well if you have any questions. On average, applicants tell us it takes between 5 and 9 hours to complete the application, depending if they've previously applied or have already gotten started on their Giving Common profile. And just a reminder, our next deadline is February 1st. Now I just wanted to share some information with you on our FY18 grantees and who we funded in the past. Through the Open Door Grants program, we wish to support an impactful and diverse portfolio of grantees. When we say diverse, we mean our portfolio should be diverse along a number of different dimensions. The budget size of the organization, the geography they serve, mission type, the population served, among other things. That being said, I'll just quickly share some statistics with you regarding our grantees from last year. In FY18, we received over 400 applications and had 93 grantees. So that's about 21% of applicants receiving a grant. Our program is fairly competitive due to the high volume. The average grant size was $24,000. We often get the question, does it make our application more competitive if we ask for a funding amount close to the average grant size? The answer is no. Please ask for what you need. If your project budget needs $50,000, ask for $50,000 and know that we may partially fund your request. A reason we partially fund is because we have been collecting information back from our previous grantees, and they're reporting back to us that on average, they're able to leverage our grants for 6 times more funding. Knowing that we partially fund is also important as an applicant to be thorough on your budget sheet. 26% of FY18 grantees have a budget under $500,000, and approximately 75% have a budget under $5 million. That being said, we funded organizations with a budget of $0 all the way to over $100 million. 28% of our grantees have never received a grant from the Boston Foundation before, and an additional 17% have only received minimal support. Finally, 37% of our grantees are outside the city of Boston. Part of our diverse portfolio is geographic diversity, and we do our best to fund organizations across our catchment area, not just within the city of Boston. I do also, in case anyone on the line has applied previously, want to discuss some year 3 changes that you can expect in your reapplication. The biggest change is the transition from making grants quarterly to considering applications twice per year. This year our deadlines were August 1st, and now the upcoming February 1st deadline. Our narrative application is largely the same, with the exception of our organizational demographics question, or our diversity, equity, and inclusion question. This question has always existed on our application, but we expanded the word limit and provided a bit more guidance this time around. We are really looking for organizations to share with us how their board and staff is reflective of the community served across a wide variety of dimensions, including but certainly not limited to race and ethnic diversity, age, gender identity, sexual orientation, disability status, and lived experiences. We are also interested in learning about any commitments your organization has made to diversity, equity, and inclusion, and the organizational practices, programs, or initiatives that support these commitments. The final change that you'll notice is our feedback delivery mechanism. The goal of our program is to remain open and responsive to the community, meaning that we're always listening to your feedback and experience with the program and making improvements. In prior years, we have included constructive feedback on your applications in the denial notification letters. This year, after receiving feedback from our prior applicants, instead of giving you written feedback, the denial letter will include a link to register for a phone call with either Stephanie or myself, and we'll discuss feedback over the phone in more of a conversational setting rather than that written feedback in the letter. So that's all the information that Stephanie and I have planned to present to you today. So I'll hand it back over to Stephanie to handle the question and answer portion of today's webinar.
All right, thanks, Lauren. We hope that information about what we funded previously and a few of our changes was helpful to you. So moving forward, just a reminder to submit a question. Please click on the question mark located on the top right-hand corner of your screen, type the question into the text box that appears, and then click send. And thank you to everyone who has already submitted questions. So we'll start there with some of the questions that we've already received, and please feel free to continue to submit questions. One note I will make here, if you have a very specific question regarding, something very specific to your organization, we'd really encourage you to email us instead so that we can touch base more directly. So that email address is opendoor@tbf.org. You can see it on the left-hand side of the screen in gold, just for any, again, specific questions relevant just for your organization. So let's get started. Wow, we already have quite a few. So the first question is, can you apply for 2 years of funding at the same time? And the answer to that question is no. These are one-year grants. We know that multi-year support can be incredibly impactful for organizations, but through the Open Door Grants program, we do only provide 1 year of support at a time. So you are welcome to reapply for funding if you're funded for 1 year. So thank you for that very thoughtful question. Let's see. When applying for a capacity building grant, in this case to develop a fundraising department, but this question I think applies to all capacity building grants, how much info do you want to know about our programs or accomplishments? And do you want to know about our programs, more specifically about the program accomplishments or the capacity building accomplishments? So yeah, this is a tough one. So I would say generally it's always great for us to understand the mission of your organization's accomplishments, things like how you measure, what commitments you have to diversity, equity, and inclusion. We really do want a sound understanding of those basic components. And we have outlined in the narrative applications a few areas for you to really describe that. So I would certainly, in the organizational overview areas, really focus on your organization. There will be a few project-specific questions, and I think those are the opportunities to specifically talk about capacity building, either accomplishments or, additional descriptions of, how you're going to carry out the capacity building project in the coming year. So the application lays it out pretty clearly where to put what, but, feel free to reach out to our team at opendoor@tbf.org if there are any questions about, how to position your response based on a capacity building request. We do have some help text available in the application though. All right, so next up, another sort of eligibility related question. Do applicants have to have a Giving Common profile? So the answer is yes, but only an abbreviated profile. So as Lauren mentioned, there are two components to the grant application. The first is the narrative application, and then the second is a few key fields on the Giving Common. So when you submit those fields, you'll notice it's things like demographic diversity of your board and staff, more information about your leadership, financial information for your organization that you have available, and a few other key things that we consider during our review process. But a full profile is not necessary, and if you only complete an abbreviated version of the profile for the purposes of your Open Door Grants application, please note that it will not be a public profile. It will be available only to you and to our staff team that's reviewing the applications. All right. So moving on to what sounds like a question pertaining to one organization, but I think it might be more broadly appropriate for others. So this potential applicant asks, as a community center with a generalized mission to support all members of a specific neighborhood, some of my organization's programs and services align with certain goals and approaches in TBF's 5 impact areas. For a general operating support funding, does it make me ineligible because we may offer services that touch upon the impact areas. So one thing I would back up and say here is, you are only eligible for either open door grants or the impact area funding that we discussed earlier in the webinar. And I would just note that if you think that you are doing some work related to the impact areas, please reach out to us directly so that we can either talk with you over the phone or email with you to just get a sense of which route here at the foundation makes the most sense for funding. All right, so let's see. Could you share some examples of how previous awardees have been able to leverage TBF's funds to raise more? Sure, I'd love to share this. And this is something we're actually working on, how we can get better at supporting our organizations. So a few examples of ways that previous organizations have, leveraged their funding is I think that they've been very visible in the Boston Foundation being a supporter of theirs, so they've added our logo to their website or to, other promotional materials. They have also, really publicized the grants, so they have done a press release that publicized the funding partnership. Another area where we see a lot of potential opportunity is for grantees to reach out to us when they are approaching other funders to see if we happen to know that funder, could make an introduction for them. We've also seen heard from organizations that when they apply for other grants, mentioning that the Boston Foundation supports them within their grant application has been helpful to them in their efforts to make those connections with other institutional funders. So those are, I would say, a handful of many other ways that folks have used the grant from the foundation to leverage funds. Great question. All right, so this is a good one. What is the next deadline after February 1st? So we actually do not know yet. We are in the process of determining what the deadlines will be for the remainder of 2019 and early 2020. Without getting into too many technical details, that's the start of our new fiscal year here at the Boston Foundation. So we'll be making that determination a little bit closer to the February 1st deadline. Great. Wow, lots of questions pouring in. Okay, we'll get to as many as we can, and I'll also probably hand some of these off to my colleague, Lauren, as well. Let's see. What is the timeline back for, the timeline for hearing back about receiving funds, particularly for the February 1st deadline? Also a good question. So our sort of turnaround time to review that, 200 plus grant pool is about 4.5 months. So, yes, that's right, 4.5 months. So you'll receive notification about the February 1st deadline in June. All right. If I'm not sure my proposal or organization falls under open door grants or an impact area, where is the contact info for the correct program officers to talk to? That's a good question. We do have a staff list that shares, all of the various impact areas on our website with the staff sort of clearly noted, for contact information. I would say a good first step, though, is to just reach out to our Open Door Grants sort of dedicated email helpline, the opendoor@tbf.org, and we can also route you to the appropriate person on staff to answer your question and help determine eligibility. Let's see. Is the salary for a new program manager something we can request for? I'm wondering if Maybe, Lauren, do you want to take this one just for novelty's sake for everyone on the on the webinar?
So a salary is certainly an eligible request for funding. I will say if you're coming in requesting for a new staffing position, that you really talk about how you're going to sustain that position or are thinking about sustaining that position after the 1-year grant. Since our grant period is so short, our review team often hopes to find out how you're thinking about keeping that staff member on board after the grant period ends in 1 year.
Thanks. So another question is, can a brand new nonprofit apply for a grant, or must they be established for a certain number of years before they can apply? Also a really good question. The answer to that is all are welcome. So you can be a brand new nonprofit, one that's been around for a long time, or anything in between, and we really have funded sort of all of those categories in our first 2.5 years of this program. Let's see. Can we set up a meeting ahead of time with you to discuss our programs and evaluate fit before we submit an application? So we would welcome the opportunity to, hear about your mission and see if Open Door Grants is the best sort of source of funding here at the foundation. I'd recommend that you start by sending an email to opendoor@tbf.org, and if we feel like we need to connect over the phone or in person, we can certainly do that. Will the ODG program continue after this funding round? I love that when folks can submit questions anonymously. They're very they're really good questions, probing questions. So the answer is yes. That is the current plan. We are planning to move that forward. That will be in the next fiscal year. So we still haven't established many of the parameters for the coming year, but our plan is for this program to continue into next fiscal year for us, I should say. Let's see. Oh, this is a really good question. On what basis are applications evaluated in addition to organizational demographics? So I'll start here, and maybe, Lauren, you can help fill in the gaps if I forget anything. So we try and be fairly transparent about this because we know that folks want to know how they will be evaluated. So we do have a staff-driven review process, and our board does consider and approve all of the grants that go through this program. More specifically, how individual applications are judged is we do have a rubric which contains criteria in 3 main domains. The first is sort of the organization's strength or health. The second is the project's potential for impact, or the coming year's general operating purpose, the coming year's potential for impact. And the third domain is essentially does the organization have the needed partnerships and funding, et cetera, to make that project or that coming year happen. But within each of those 3 areas, there are much more granular criteria that we look at, which we have made available online. So if you go to the Open Door Grants section of the Boston Foundation's website, you will see on the homepage a link to our FAQ section. And within the FAQ, we actually have made the criteria of our rubric available online. So that is available to you. I don't know if there's anything else you'd add, Lauren, or I think you have the criteria pulled up so we can even run through them.
I'll just add that when we talk about organizational strength and potential for impact, as well as ability to deliver, we try to make sure our review team is aware of the size of the organization. And so for smaller organizations, we're not judging them on if their measurement and assessment plan isn't as built out per se as a larger organization. And so I will say, if you're a smaller organization looking at the criteria, it might be a little intimidating, but just be aware that our review team really tries to scale it for the size of the organization we're reviewing.
Great. All right, so I'm just going to see if there are any natural groupings of these questions. Talk about. So we have a couple of kind of budget-related questions, so we'll go to that for just a moment. The first is, do you have a percentage limit for funding? For example, some funders will not fund more than 5 or 10% of your organization's budget. The answer to that question is no. We do not have a baseline or a threshold, percentage that of your overall budget that we will fund. I would say, if you're a very small organization, just to be aware that, if you're requesting a grant for larger than your current organization's budget, you may just need to sort of explain or provide rationale about that request size for us. But no, there is no sort of threshold or percentage of your total budget for which you can apply. The next budget-related question is, and this is specific, someone's definitely applied or started their application. So the question is, could you talk about your organization's contribution as a column of the budget form? From an accounting standpoint, can you clarify what you mean? Is a match from within the organization expected? Okay, that's a great question. So just to back up for those who maybe haven't seen this form yet, the form we're referring to is, along with your narrative application, we ask that you submit a project budget for a project support request, or you can submit your organization's own operating budget for an general operating support request. So for this project budget form that we make available to you, we do have a column that allows you to identify whether your organization is contributing anything to the project. So that can vary by organization. We certainly don't expect that you have a contribution to the project, but most organizations do. So we do just allow for you to have a space to say what that contribution is. Sometimes that's a portion of the executive director's staff time. Sometimes that's maybe a part of the transportation options that you already have available to your organization, and that's going to be your organization's contribution. It really varies by organization what to include, but we don't have a specific idea or parameters around what that contribution should be. We do just want to provide applicants with the space to tell us about that. The last budget-related question, at least that I can see, is are construction and build-out costs something that we can request money for in the budget? And the answer to that is, unfortunately, no. We don't provide funding for sort of capital construction costs. So if you're planning to do any kind of construction, for example, modifications to your office, or a new capital sort of building that you're doing a capital campaign for, those are not things that we are able to support through Open Door grants. Let's see. Whew, I might take a breath for a moment. These are all really good questions. Let's see. What percentage of program general support proposals, program requests, and
I think it's what percentage of general operating support.
Oh, I see. Okay, thank you. Our trusty colleague, Lee Hanshu, is here sort of fielding the questions that we're receiving. So thank you, Lee, for that clarity. So what percentage of general operating support proposals were funded last round, and what might have made these proposals stand out? Do you want to start with this one, Lauren?
Yes. So we funded about 1/3 of our grantees were general operating support and 2/3 were project support. And before I continue, I'll just say that's roughly a reflection of the kinds of grants we're receiving. We receive about 1/3 project support, 1/3 general operating support, 2/3 project support. If we received more general operating support, we would make more general operating support grants, so it's not that we have a bias for one over the other. I think, and Stephanie can add on to this as well, what makes a general operating support grant super compelling is if something big is happening in your upcoming year, or you're doing a new program, there's an inflection point for the organization. Just hearing about what you have planned for the upcoming year that we will be supporting is really what makes a general operating support grant stand out to us.
Yeah, I would say in the past, examples of what Lauren just shared about these inflection points. So we see things like, a longtime executive director is transitioning out, or there's a new executive director that's just come on. Perhaps there's a recent strategic plan that, the organization is now pivoting some of its programming or work. So examples like that of sort of big things happening, I think folks realize that that's often a time where organizations are looking for additional support. But it doesn't have to be one of those inflection points. It could be that you're just doing really strong work in the coming year and you continue to need funds to support that great work. And so identifying those big priorities for your organization for the year is really helpful to us when we're considering general operating support requests. Sort of also as to decision making and criteria, who makes the Open Door grants decisions? What a good question. Well, it's certainly not one person. All of our discretionary grant making here at the Boston Foundation is considered and approved by our board of directors. In addition to that, we do have a process internally to recommend proposals. And that process includes a lot of stakeholders from across the foundation. So depending on how far your application sort of gets through the consideration process, it will likely be reviewed by anywhere from 2 to upwards of 15 review team members who all read, review, discuss the application that you submitted. Let's see. Wow, the questions just keep pouring in. Let's see. I think maybe we can go to this one because it's not a question we actually receive. Well, sometimes we receive that. For a proposal submitted jointly from 2 organizations, do both organizations need to be in TBF's catchment area? So first of all, but before I answer this specific question, I'll back up and say we welcome collaborative applications. So if you and another organization are considering applying together, you're welcome to do so. And just one organization would need to be sort of the backbone organization that applies. So on behalf of that collaboration, I don't think that all organizations need to be within that catchment area. I think the more important thing, as Lauren mentioned about some of the catchment area issues earlier, is that the work itself that you're requesting funding for, that occurs or benefits the greater Boston geographic area that we shared earlier. So if your physical location is not in that geographic area, that is fine, or partners on that collaboration, that's fine. It's more important the work is happening there. And then, yeah, so I think we've answered a couple of these related to collaborations, which is great. If you're using a fiscal sponsor, who needs to have the Giving Common profile? So what I would say here is, the first step to starting the Giving Common portion of any application to Open Door grants is to reach out to our Giving Common staff, and we have guidelines about this on our website. You'll send them an email, and I would just outline for them that you have a fiscal sponsor. Usually they'll work with you to deem what's most appropriate for your organization. Often it's creating sort of a mini profile for your own organization, not the fiscally sponsored or the fiscal sponsoring org. So that you can do things like outline who's on your advisory board as opposed to on, the governing board, or you can share some specific financials for your program as opposed to all of the financials for the fiscal sponsoring organization. So just reach out, and they do a really great job of adjusting the profile needs for the needs of fiscally sponsored organizations. Okay. So it looks like okay, this is also a good question, and it's a little broader in scope. We're kind of bouncing around in terms of what we're asking. So, could you provide some examples of capacity building and public policy projects? In addition, does the Open Door Grants Program fund research-based projects? So, sure. Examples of capacity building and public policy projects. One capacity building project that we have helped to fund is, if anyone is familiar with United South End Settlements, located here in the South End in Boston. Shout out to USIS if they're on the phone today. But they came to us for some strategic planning dollars, so we did support them for 2 consecutive years for their capacity building efforts, specifically as they were navigating through a strategic plan. And for a public policy project, so we actually funded a group called Teens Leading the Way. They're based out of UTEC, United Teen Equality Center, located in Lowell, but the work that they were doing was really focused on expungement efforts to expunge certain offenses from youth records, and they were doing some really amazing youth-based advocacy work, and so we supported them also for 2 years to support that youth-based advocacy work because it really did have the policies that they were hoping to have passed were really, the impacts of those policies would have disproportionately affected Greater Boston. So we really saw a connection to the geographic catchment area. And then, does the Open Door Grants Program fund research-based projects? The answer to this is yes and no. We don't fund sort of medical research or other types of research coming out of larger institutions that are more focused on the scientific or medical fields. We do sometimes support community-based research, and what I mean by that is research that the research team has identified in coordination with the community that would be impacted or would benefit from the research, and that also has a strong stakeholder component to not only through the research but also for disseminating and making actionable the research. So that's typically the kind of research that we support. All right. Let's see. Will you consider funding for an additional staff member, as we would love to add another part-time staffer? Do you want to take this a little bit? Yes.
So as I mentioned earlier, staffing as well as salaries are certainly eligible for an Open Door Grants application. I will say once again that if you're interested in adding a staff member and that's what you come into Open Door Grants for, that you talk about how you're hoping to sustain the position after the 1-year grant period. We just want to make sure that we're not funding someone's position that can ultimately not be sustained within the organization, and so it's certainly eligible, just sometimes reviewers have some questions around sustainability.
Let's see. Ooh, I might give this one to you also, Lauren. Are the new diversity, equity, and inclusion questions also a part of the renewal application?
So our renewal application is an abbreviated application, they're not included in it. The application asks a lot less questions about your organization since we already are acquainted with you. So it's an abbreviated profile with mostly questions about your success over the last grant year, as well as what you're hoping to continue to do in the second year of funding.
All right. Let's see. So we're looking, sorry for the pause, everyone. We're just kind of looking through this really robust list of questions to try and see if there are some that we could lump together and respond all at once. So one question, we'll get into some maybe more logistics questions. One question is for the February 1st deadline. Well, actually, let's go back. We were just talking about the renewal question, so it might be helpful to ask or to answer one of the other renewal questions that came up. So somebody asked if they are allowed to apply for a second year of funding if the work differs from the goals in year one, and should the project plan be for 1 year or 2? So I think we discussed that the project plan should only be for 1 year, and funded programs will need to be applying for the same program if they came in for program support, or general operating support if they came in for general operating support in their year 2 request, but the goals can be different. Like, we understand that your work changes, and so if you have different goals in your second year of funding, that's to be expected. So you're welcome to apply. We would just have you outline what those goals are in the renewal application that Lauren just mentioned. All right, maybe now we can go into the sort of more logistics questions. So for the February 1st deadline, should we ask for funding for next year, for example, starting July 2019 to June 2020, rather than this year, which for this organization is September 2018 to June 2019? I think at the core of this question is, do you fund things that have already happened retroactively? Do you want to answer this one, Lauren, or should I? Okay, I'll take this one. I think, if all of the work that you plan to do is going to be completed before you hear back about the status on the grant in June of 2019, that's pretty unlikely to be funded, just because that work will have either happened or not happened, based on whether or not you have news about the funding. So I would say it's okay if your efforts have already started before you receive grant notification, because we anticipate for project support requests or for new work that you may already have other funders at the table. You may need to go ahead and get started. That's fine, but we do anticipate that a good portion of the work that you're planning to do should happen within the 1-year grant period. And so that grant period would be July 2019 through July 2020. All right. More sort of granular or more logistics questions. So do we need letters of support to apply? Do you want to take this?
Yeah. Yeah, we certainly do not require letters of support to apply. If you have them and want to include them, there is a section to attach any optional attachments to the application, so it's certainly not a requirement, but if you would like to include them, you're more than welcome to.
And there's one here about, we'll get to some of the technical questions since we're talking about these more granular things. Character limit. So I guess an applicant has had an issue where the system saved a response, but it's above the suggested character limit, and should it be reduced to the character limit? And the answer is yes. I don't know if you want to talk anything about the character limits in the application more generally, Lauren?
Yeah, so our system will cut off the character limit when it comes through to us, and so I recommend that you stick with the character limit. I'll also say that if a section has a low character limit, it means that we're not anticipating a ton of information back from you. You'll see some that have much more, like that diversity, equity, and inclusion question I mentioned has a fairly large character limit. And so that's where we're really hoping to get more information from you. If there's a small character limit, we're really just asking for some quick information. We don't need it to be super long.
Okay. Let me just see if there are any other sort of logistics or technical questions that we can answer. No, so it looks like maybe we can go back to some questions about the grant program itself. A few folks have asked, first, understanding that we do not know the timing of the next application deadline after February 1st, do we anticipate there will be another round within the year? The answer is yes. So we do anticipate that there will be another deadline in sometime in late summer of 2019, but we just haven't set that exact date. And the reason why we haven't set that exact date, in case it's helpful to know, is we did hear back from some of our nonprofits that the August 1st deadline that we had earlier this fiscal year can be kind of challenging because either it's a very busy time for folks who are doing youth-based work in the summertime, or folks are taking a much-needed vacation. So we do understand that, and so we're looking to see if that's still the best timeline moving forward. But you can visit the website again in the next few weeks. We should have all of the timelines posted then. And similarly, someone asked, do we, let me see, where did it go? Did we anticipate procuring additional funds for the future year? And right now, we don't have our budget set for the coming year, so I definitely cannot say with certainty. What I can tell you is what we've done in the past, which is really hovered around that $2 million annual grant-making budget. So that would be my best guess, but again, we haven't, as an organization, set our budgets for the coming year yet. Is there any of these other questions that are more about the grant program, sort of deadlines or budget? I think that might be it. I have a question for Lauren that came through that I think is a good one for us to touch on, which is, what is the general makeup of past grantees? For example, environmental organizations, financial literacy, et cetera. So maybe you can give us a brief sort of update on what that is and how we select the distribution of those funds.
Yeah, so our general makeup is based off of the applications we're receiving. So if we receive a large percentage of our applicants are youth development, then we would fund a larger percentage of youth development. And so it's really based off of the kinds of applications we are receiving. And it tends to be, I use youth development as an example because it tends to be a larger percent of youth development, arts and culture, as well as, hold on, I have a list so I can look.
Lots of human services, direct services for individuals,
as well as education. So there are top percentage of grantees, but that's reflected as the number of applications we receive from them as well. I will say if you're asking this for your organization particularly, feel free to reach out to me and I can tell you what percentage of applicants or grantees we've received for either your mission area or your geography served. I have all of those numbers, so if there's something that really is curious to you, feel free to reach out to me and I can share that information with you.
Thanks, Lauren. So one question came up about exclusions. So on our website, we do say that, folks who apply cannot be in direct conflict with the strategies, goals, and approaches pursued by the Foundation's 5 impact areas. So one of the questions asked, what does that mean? That's a great question. So essentially what that means is, we do see this Open Door Grants work as a complementary approach to those 5 impact areas. And so as a result, we're probably not going to fund something that is going to directly work against one of those bodies of work that's happening in the impact areas. I think a really good example here is, in our neighborhoods and housing area, we do a lot of policy advocacy, statewide work, coalition work around affordable housing. So we would not fund an organization whose policy efforts are in direct opposition to affordable housing. That doesn't sort of serve the complementary approach of Open Door Grants to those impact areas. So that's what we mean by that. Let's see. This is a good one, evaluation. So at the end of funding a project, do you expect a report or some sort of evidence of success and impact? Also, are there different reporting requirements for program support versus general operating support? Would you like to take this one? Lauren is the person who sends you your surveys and makes sure that you complete them if you receive a grant.
Yeah, so our reporting requirements are fairly minimal. We are aware that our grants are only $10,000 to $50,000, and so we don't want to be too cumbersome with our reporting requirements. Essentially, after you're notified that you're a grantee, you'll receive an initial grantee survey where we ask for your goals going forward for the next year. We also ask for some feedback from you on how the application process was, and some information that we're collecting around new and emerging issues that you see in your community, or so it's not too intensive for the initial, and I will say that the end of year survey is rather similar. We ask you to reflect back on the goals you shared with us previously, mention if there was anything that came up that was an issue, but we are not asking for any kind of budget report back or anything of that sort. And so they are rather quick surveys, I would say 15 to 20 minutes at most, and we just collect those 2 things back from you. That being said, we're happy if you have a report that came out of your project or anything additional you want to share with us. We're always excited to see that kind of information, but we're not requiring any formalized reporting.
Great. So we're going to dip back into a couple of budget questions. It seems like that's the area where a lot of prospective applicants have concerns or questions. So one question is about for organizations that have a statewide focus, do you want to see the budget specific to TBS catchment area as opposed to the statewide budget? And the answer there is it depends. It depends on the type of funding you're applying for. So If you're applying for project support, you are probably best served sort of outlining the budget request for that geographic area that you serve. For those that are requesting general operating support, you may absolutely submit your own budget, but what you may want to do is outline in one of the questions on the application is a budget narrative, so it allows you to share more about your budget. So you may just want to include a little bit of information about what portion of the overall efforts budget-wise are directed towards that geographic catchment area. So it's an opportunity to, a flexible opportunity to provide more description if you do submit the operating budget for a general operating support request. And similarly, somebody asked, well, where can we find this ODG budget template attachment, what we've been talking so much about? And do we have to use the TBS budget form, or can we use AGM's form, for example? And sort of which year's budget should we submit? So to start, the budget template is included in the narrative application. There's a link to it in the narrative application when you get started. So at the very end of the application, there will be a place that you can download the Excel template where you can type in your own budget. And you do not have to use our TBS budget form if you're applying for general operating support. We do prefer that you use our budget template if you're applying for project support. If you have some complicating issue with that, just reach out to us and we can have a conversation about it. And folks wanted to know, should it be the fiscal year 19 or fiscal year 20? I don't know this organization's fiscal year. I would say, go with the fiscal year that you anticipate will most line up with the period of work July 2019 to 2020. That may overlap a couple of different fiscal years for you, but just sort of make a decision and explain that decision in the application. Let me see if there's anything else. This might be a helpful one to answer. Can you share some concrete examples of what organizations have applied for? Sure. I might get Lauren to help me think of some of these examples. So we shared a couple about the capacity building and the policy requests. We often, I'll share some big buckets. We see requests from larger organizations, especially those that have a lot of government funding but are kind of hamstrung to that government funding. So we see a lot of requests from those folks for new projects or something that they want to try differently that maybe they don't have the support to do. So we have supported, large homeless shelters for a new body of work that isn't tied to some of the government funding that they receive. We also have funded, I'll share one of our two-time grantees. We funded some really incredible work at Hawthorne Youth and Community Center in Roxbury that does amazing arts-based and sort of experiential learning for youth. They're a really incredible community-based organization. It runs the gamut. In our time here, we've made now almost 200 grants. So I would just say if you want concrete examples, the best place to go is the FAQ section of our website. We have one FAQ that just links to all of the projects we've supported. So that's the best place to learn specifically about what we've supported. Lauren, is there anything you'd add to that?
I was just going to also recommend that you look at the list. We just fund so many people, and it's since our program is so open, we have done funding for a multitude of different types. It's not like there's one project that we see reoccurring or a certain ask that we see reoccurring. And so that might be the best place for you to look if you're looking for something that's maybe similar to what you're applying for.
All right. Another question asks, would you recommend a proposed project site research that would help make the case for the importance of the work as it relates to one of the impact areas? I'm not exactly sure how to answer this related to the impact areas. I do think that one part of the application that I would point out is we have a question titled Context, and it asks you essentially to provide us context on the issue, the need, the opportunity, the challenge that you're looking to address with the grant request that you've submitted. So that's the perfect opportunity to provide any kind of research that you all use to frame the work that you're doing or to better understand what need might be out there. So I think that's a great place to start. Are there other things you would add to that, Lauren?
No, I would also just share that it's fairly rare that we see an application site research, so it's definitely not an expectation.
Right.
Of ours.
Yeah, that's right. Great. So it looks like we have still some questions coming in. Yeah, so it says, are funds only for nonprofits, or do we have to have a fiscal sponsor to apply? And can funds be used for team trainings or to sort of do nonprofit building, team building? So that question, yes, you do have to be a 501c3 to apply. If you do not have your own 501c3, that is when you get a fiscal sponsor. And you can use funds for team trainings or building nonprofits. We've seen nonprofits do this before. To part of their proposal for a capacity building request, for example, is professional development for, either certain staff or all staff. And we usually just like to know sort of how you're thinking about professional development for your staff in an ongoing way as well. So, but you are welcome to apply for that. And yeah, I know we're not going to be able to get to all of the questions, and so we'll probably send out a follow-up email just pointing you in the directions of some of the questions we aren't able to. So we'll try to get to just two more while we're on the phone today to wrap up our time. Does TBS sponsor area nonprofit fundraising events? If so, what is the process for submitting that type of request? And I would add to this question, and does that impact your Open Door Grants request as well? So the answer is yes, we do offer sponsorships for nonprofit fundraising events. It's actually a separate process from Open Door Grants, so you don't need to apply for Open Door Grants for this. Instead, if you go to our website, and there will be a search box in the top right-hand corner, if you'll type in sponsorships, it'll lead you to a web page to there's an online form essentially that you submit to request whatever sponsorship information that you have. I think it's very helpful for us if you submit sponsorship levels or information about the fundraising goals for the program, but that form will suggest to you what all you need to share. And and the process for submitting that type of request. And just know that you are dually eligible for sponsorship funding as well as Open Door Grants, so it doesn't impact your your sponsorship request if you apply to Open Door Grants or vice versa. Great. And the last question is for Lauren. Will there be a copy of this presentation or recording where I can find it? Can I hand that to you?
Yes. So yes, we are recording this session and are hoping to make it available to you. It might take a few days for it to be up on our website. My assumption is it will be on the FAQ guidelines page. That's probably the best place for it, and so I would give it a couple of days but it should be up there.
All right, so we didn't get to a lot of the questions that came in, and so we apologize if we weren't able to get to your specific question. However, if that is the case, we would welcome the opportunity to still answer it. So you're welcome to email that question to, again, that Open Door Grants email helpline, opendoor@tbs.org. And we'll get back to you as soon as we can with the answer to your question. I know we're going to experience lots of folks with questions over the coming weeks, and if something comes up as you're considering that February 1st upcoming deadline, please do reach out to us. And with that, we just wanted to say thank you for all that you do in our community. We recognize the hard work that you put into the work that you do, and we just really want to thank you for also your time today, because that's valuable. And again, if you have questions after today's webinar, I encourage you to reach out to us. So enjoy the rest of your day. Thanks so much.